we want good and abundant populations of fish and wildlife. We want access to them, but there's often a spectrum to define those things. In some ways, we want a primitive experience that, like capital W wilderness areas might provide, that might not be appropriate everywhere else. We want a big tent. There's people who want to drift rivers. There's people who want to motorboat rivers, and we try to find the balance. There's people who want to bow hunt over rifle hunt, whatever. We bring all those different interests. We try to find the balance. There's enough space in Idaho for all of us to kind of get what we want, and we want to make sure that we're talking to our affiliates, to grassroots folks, electeds, from top to bottom, to figure out what those things are. That is what we do. That's our bread and butter.
This is the Voice for the Wild podcast, a production of the Idaho Wildlife Federation, where we share stories of Idaho's wild game species, wild places, and of course the wild people at the core of the almost 90-year history of enhancing and conserving Idaho's sporting tradition.
Hey, Brian, this is pretty exciting.
Howdy.
We are here recording the first episode of the Voice for the Wild podcast, the official podcast of the Idaho Wildlife Federation. But so everybody else knows, my name's Daniel. I do communications for the Idaho Wildlife Federation, and wild trout nut turned steelheader. And maybe it would be good to, out of the gate, just give everybody your kind of personal origin story into hunting and fishing.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Brian Brooks. You've probably seen me or heard me before. I'm the executive director of the Idaho Wildlife Federation, and I got into doing hunting and fishing and all of my outdoor activities just being a product of Idaho. My family was really good about getting all 3 kids outdoors all the time. We used to take really long summer vacations. My dad was always hunting in the fall and winter. We had drift boats, so we could fish the South Fork Boise's by home waters, and just went around Idaho doing all the things you do to pursue fish and game, and also just backpacking and whitewater and all that good stuff. So that's how I got into all this. I'm a generalist. You're a steelhead fisherman.
Yeah, I'm kind of a niche guy. Yeah. I've always been. I've got a sickness. I'm addicted, and I've always been that way. I've always really been into the sort of niche, the subcultures of the subcultures. I'm a bit more of a discipline focused kind of person than you're the generalist.
Yeah.
I appreciate it though.
Yeah.
We've all got our kind of specialties on the staff here, and
there's like I grew up, like I steelhead fished when I grew up. I would Chinook fish. I'd go up to Riggins and follow the fish up through the South Fork Salmon River, but that was like a convenience thing. Like we it was like you can't do too much of it, because then they would take away from, like, well, you got to go like turkey hunting, or you got to go like there's fly fishing to do elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I feel like if I get too zoned in on a thing, I'm missing out on all the other things.
And I think there's a lot of there's a lot of value there, and I see it in a lot of ways. Like, I sort of aspire to do that, but I've got a sickness, and so I definitely do it when it's not convenient and travel far and wide and spend too much time doing that. But that's really fulfilling for me. And this podcast has been something we've been talking about for a long time. I brought it up a couple of years ago, and grateful to finally have the bandwidth and capability to do it. But I think I'd love to talk with you about, like, the purpose of this podcast, and the way that I see it is that, there's a million podcasts out there, but we report a lot of news, and we're constantly educating, we're giving people information, and we're working hard, and largely kind of behind the scenes. You and I have talked, and these are the stories of the wildlife and the wild places and the wild people that are certainly behind, and there's plenty of those that are sort of behind and responsible for this tradition and this heritage that we all love here in Idaho. I want to hear a little bit about what you think this podcast is going to bring. For why should people tune in on the ride out to go hunting with their buddies, or to head out to the lake to go fishing?
We did talk about this for a while, and my response was like, is there a shortage of
I've got
podcasts?
too much to do.
Like, there are so many out there, and they're mostly done by people two dudes that look just like us.
Yep.
Bearded white guys who are just, So, but I think now, like, I was one of the first, people our age, in our mid-30s especially, were probably one of the first, like, people age class to join social media, Facebook.
Yeah.
And, like, some other ones before that, like MySpace and all that, whatever. But it's...
R.I.P.
Yeah. R.I.P. Some things are never truly dead. We'll see if it comes back. But The point is that I have been on those platforms for years, and they've outlived their usefulness, in my opinion. They became filled with white noise. I no longer get a lot of good out of some of those old dinosaur things, and it's just this space, in my opinion, and I'm no expert, but it's evolving. Our media landscape is incredibly fractured. People choose how and when and who gives them their news. And I think, I've actually turned to podcasts more and more, especially because my time is so consumed by all the things that I need to do, whether it's work, family. And so I'm listening to podcasts while I'm on my commute, while I'm working out, while I'm, on my way to fishing or to the duck blind. And sometimes it can be a really good, I'm on the way to the duck blind. My buddies and I are listening to a hunting podcast, and we'll talk about it, throughout the day. And so I think this is, that's why we're finally finally doing
Finally
this.
turned the corner.
Yeah, and I think that, like, what my goal is for this is we want to give people something else other than what they might already be consuming from IWF. It needs to be different than our we want it to be different than our blog posts. We want it to be different than our, weekly legislative recaps. We're not just going to give you what we're already giving you. We want to give you a little bit, the depth, the context, the story behind some of the work that we're already doing.
No, I think it's super important, and I think you nailed it. And that's kind of been, I'd love to hear yours, but that's really been my personal and professional sort of, that's where they come together for me, is that this is working to translate the values that you and I and many Idahoans for, almost a century now have been working towards conserving and enhancing and preserving. And it's sort of my job, our job, to relay that to the general public, and to sort of make that to make it interesting and to really get behind the scenes. And so I'm looking forward to that. On that note, for me, I'm a recovering journalist. I like to call myself. Like, tell me a little bit about how you personally decided that this conservation lane was for you.
Yeah, I originally wanted to be a teacher, and I think there's maybe it's because I like to talk a lot and communicate and relay like what I've learned. I think, science really spoke to me, and I thought there were so many. There's like natural sciences, earth sciences, ecosystem sciences, and I thought that, like, I wanted to teach that to other people because it is really cool, and I still do that. This job is a huge part of that, but I started, getting into conservation and understanding that the fish populations we have, the big game populations we have, none of it was by accident.
Yeah.
There was a time where people, especially, European settlers came over the mountains into Idaho, and it was an accident. We just had abundant fish and game. But now with modernizing world, none of it is by accident, and management decisions and conservation decisions impact our abilities to enjoy fish and wildlife or have access to them. And I started going towards, like, applying the science of, like, towards, like, restoration of ecosystems, and that was my college path for a while. And then I started to realize how expensive ecosystem restoration was, and how really you never get back to the sort of natural characteristics that we once had.
Yeah.
So even after spending billions of dollars to, correct some mistakes that we've made, it's not like it doesn't get you back to that natural state. So I started to realize that maybe policy is the best impact we can have from prevention of severe degradation of our natural resources. And so that turned me into, I was just like, you're just looking at, like, an effort versus, like, cost payoff, doing the policy route and just conserving what we already have and doing restoration. That's still important, but I thought that was a much better use of my time to preserve the natural, ecosystems. And of course, what drew me to it, as I mentioned, is hunting and fishing.
Well, that's a very sort of minute, not minute, but sort of small scale recognition of what at the biggest scale is it's the sportsman's dilemma. It's recognizing that our participation does have an impact. However, we are really working hard that as conservationists, that's the part of our kind of sporting heritage where we're looking at investing into that relationship of our impact to what can we restore, what can we invest in to sustain it for the long term. I think that's sort of I don't know. There's a parallel there somewhere. Maybe I'm making a big thing out of it, but
No, no. I mean, I think most sportsmen, or they should if they don't. But I know personally, I love this the history of like the conservation movement was initiated by sportsmen. We recognize we take fish and wildlife off of the landscape. We should be primarily responsible for funding and management decisions that put those fish and wildlife species back on the landscape so we can have
yeah.
this surplus. And it's it's the user pays model. It's the foundation of the North American model of wildlife conservation, which is
Look at
incredibly
you with the segues. You're
yeah, oh
just like
yeah.
already get your prep too ready.
Yeah, that wasn't even planned. But it's just the hunting angling story of like owning conservation in this country is really fascinating, and it's important. It's something we need to preserve, but it's also something that 1/3 of North America's wildlife species are in decline and headed towards threatened endangered status and eventually extinction. So the North American model, though important, and it has worked very successfully, especially for game species, like for instance, whitetail turkeys almost went extinct, has turned those species around. But it's not. It's a large part of the equation. But maybe another podcast we can talk about that. And
Yeah. No,
in addition to,
well, we got we got out of the gates pretty quick there. Let's pull it back for
yeah, and I want to ask,
yeah.
why I got into this. Well, I want to know why you got into this.
Yeah, and I teased it a bit, but I went to school for journalism, and I've always been a reader, writer, talker. That's kind of all that I do well. And spend time by myself out in the
Yeah,
woods.
don't sell yourself short. You do
Yeah,
other things
no,
well.
but that's been my that's been my highlight reel for most of my young career. And so started writing, went to school for journalism, and personally really enjoyed spending my time outside. I grew up in Maryland, grew up on the Eastern Shore, Chesapeake Bay country.
Baltimore?
Born in Baltimore. I like to say grew up on the Eastern Shore, moved there as a teenager.
Go birds.
Go birds, all the birds. RIP this season, man. But that's definitely another podcast. I have always been interested in, for whatever reason, always been interested in analyzing and sort of challenging what people's values are. And really focusing professionally, doing that objectively through what I like to call like true journalism. I was the last era of print journalism. I think really to kind of go through the academic phases, and then personally, really looking at that on the landscape level, and whether that was fishing, which I've enjoyed forever, or just spending time in wild places. I've been a backpacker, really, always really enjoyed spending time trying to find those isolated and quiet places in a really loud world. And for me, coming to the Idaho Wildlife Federation, I've just sort of found my way. I was as interested in the stories of the species that I was pursuing. I was a native trout nut who was always more interested in the place and the history of what belonged here, and what was still present and what has lasted throughout the changes. And those stories, and sort of translating those and relaying those to my peers in the angling community, that was kind of a personal passion that I was using as a side project, which I finally decided after honestly like burning out a little bit in the world of objective journalism and newspapers. I was managing newspapers where they were kind of falling in the way of the advertiser and starting to get a little too influenced for my personal kind of health, and decided to combine the two and start working where I admittedly have a bias, and that is, pro 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 fish and wildlife and wild places, and maintaining connection with them, which I think is important, and I think can happen in a healthy way, with people that do it in different ways.
Yeah.
That's kind of the multiple use model, and I firmly believe in that. But I think we have to be aware, and I have found myself sort of feeling responsible for the awareness part of it. Hence,
your storyteller.
I like that, and I think it's important, and I see that as the role that I can play. I'm not the best hunter, angler. I probably won't climb Everest, not at this rate. But I like knowing the people that do, and I like really kind of diving in and exploring what values drive them to do that. And I think the more people know that, the better. And it's been fulfilling for me, and so far seems to be appreciated by people. So,
yeah, I'll say, I grew up in Idaho. I grew up doing the things that I do now that led me to IWF, and I've met so many people that did not have that background that turned into avid outdoors people, and I really respect that, because there's a mentorship is the biggest like kind of gateway. Like you need to have typically someone who shows you how to do these things to get you into it. And like a lot of these onset, fishing onset adults are like and hunting onset adults didn't have that. And so I respect the hell out of that. I really do. Because if I didn't, I'm kind of lazy. If I didn't have a dad that was pushing me out the door to do this kind of stuff, I have no idea if I'd get into it. But
I think a lot of people, myself included, so I won't speak for those people, but I'll speak for myself. I think a lot of folks, the world turns fast, and I think in a lot of places around the country and certainly around the world, the walls close in pretty quick, and we get into our cycles and our opportunities. And I, for whatever reason, was very lucky at a young age to have sort of one foot after another fall into opportunities to see just enough of those places, to see that that next river or the next mountain around the way, or to get that trip to drive across country, or to see this, whether it was the Sierras or the Cascades, and to taste those flavors just enough to know that there was more out there. And so I find it important to share that, because my grandfather was a photographer and a traveler, and he inspired me to, when I saw those, I knew that there was something more. And now I have learned that that's worth conserving, so that I can continue to hopefully share that experience, so that people for generations to come, and I don't have kids, you do, but I still appreciate that I want the next generation to be able to have those awakening experiences that I had in those wild places that actually take your breath away. And I know that's a little cliche, but and pulling it back down from the 30,000 foot existential sort of level, almost, like, I think it's important, and we don't want, this podcast is not going to be about nuts and bolts Idaho Wildlife Federation. But now that we know a little bit about you and I do think it's important for people to know kind of how we work and who we are. So why don't we talk about a little bit about the people that aren't here, our staff, our other colleagues, and maybe the scope of work that we cover, so that people can kind of understand what's going to be included under this umbrella.
Yeah, that sounds great. Can I ask one more character question?
Yeah, sure.
What's your favorite? I'm putting you on the spot. What's your favorite animal? What's your favorite species?
My favorite animal?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a steelhead.
Oh, really?
Oncorhynchus micus.
Nice.
Yeah, man.
Hell yeah.
I think they're amazing.
Pulling out the scientific name.
Yeah, dude.
Jeez.
Well, I just think they're remarkable because they connect all the landscapes.
Yeah, they're awesome.
For me, I grew up, in estuary country. I'm a swamp creature. And so you have those, like, you have a fish that is born in the high mountains, lives its life, gets flushed out naturally, used to. We can get into that. Lives out in the ocean, grows big. The biggest and the best survive, and they literally go upstream, back up into those mountains. They require connected landscapes. For someone that's moved around quite a bit, that's traveled, that's always been focused on water, they really represent something.
Yeah,
it's an incredible journey for me.
Yeah.
Not to mention that, when you grab one,
Yeah.
you'll know why I like them too. So, but
yeah, they're awesome.
that's tough to articulate. So, how about you? I'll challenge back at that.
Frogs. Any frog.
Follow Brian on Instagram, and
I'm
you
not
get a surprising amount of frog content.
I won't be taking any questions on that.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Dude, frogs are rad. We should probably do another podcast about our favorite animals. But
Yeah.
Like, frogs they could freeze solid. They have an enzyme that keeps their cells from rupturing. Water expands, right? Cells usually break if they freeze solids. But what's that called when your toes freeze? What is that thing? Hypothermia.
Frostbite?
No, frostbite. Yeah, it's not
okay.
hypothermia. Like, spadefoot toads can go underground and like won't come back up for 7 years until it rains like the right amount. I mean, dude, frogs are wild. They're
All right.
just like,
I think I'm gonna learn more than I anticipated on this show.
we could do an extended cut of frog facts.
Let's do it.
Let's do it later.
We'll plan on it.
Yeah. Frogs, and I won't elaborate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Man, this is gonna be my new favorite question for everybody.
Yeah. Okay. The people. Sorry.
People. Give me a little bit about give me behind the scenes on IWF, and give us kind of our range, so that people can expect what they're gonna be like. What's our guardrails a little bit?
Yeah, well, right now, IWF is a staff of 5. We sometimes have contractors that fulfill different, programmatic work that we're looking for. For instance, last year we hired some cartographers and PhD level folks to talk about big game migrations on certain national forests and how we can utilize that to influence policy, blah, blah, blah. But we have a core staff of 5 employees. Me, Kyle Mackey, who's up north, who mainly works on organizing rural communities for our salmon and steelhead campaign. He also works on some forest collaboratives and other hunting and big game, land management related issues. And Garrett Visser, who's works on a lot of land collaborative issues. He also works with our state agencies more closely on policy and works. He's kind of our NEPA federal law guru as well, as most folks know, or maybe you don't. If there's any sort of management decisions to be made, especially with a federal interface, there are a set of processes, laws that were passed in the 70s that involve the public, and so you can influence the outcome of a lot of these decisions. He's kind of our guru that way. And then of course we have Rebecca Gordon, who works behind the scenes. She's our development director, who helps us raise funds through various revenue sources to help us do the work that needs to be done.
As well as basically just keeping all of us on task all the time.
Yeah, she's fantastic. You guys, most people don't. Rebecca is also a lot of the times behind the scenes, and so yeah, there's she's sort of like the corraller of the cats. There's a lot of energy. We're a young crew, and we do really good work. And sometimes it's really easy to get off task. And Rebecca's sort of the like
Don't
she
forget.
keeps us in line. Yeah.
Don't forget.
No, yeah. So we're 5. We have a board of directors. We're a 501c3 organization, which means we can do advocacy work, but we cannot electioneer. So you can't, for instance, we can't say support politician X or support party Y. That's electioneering. That would violate our federal tax status, and we would have to dissolve. I know that many people have asked us to take stances on certain politicians and ask people to vote certain ways
Sure.
on for certain people, and we literally cannot do that.
Which
And I
is
don't want to do
something
that.
that like I do our legislative recap at the end of the season where we are reflecting on and documenting the opinions and the votes taken of politicians
Mm-hmm.
on the issues that are important to us. However, we are not like personally
You're not allowed
advocating
yeah.
for them individually.
You're not
What
allowed
would
to-
be known as that's electioneering or
Yeah, you're not allowed to editorialize
Yeah.
a vote. We can say, here's this bill. We support it or don't support it for these reasons, and then we can show you who voted for it or didn't.
Yeah.
We can't say, this guy sucks for not voting for this.
You mentioned it earlier, and I think this is a really kind of nuanced point that would probably be good to spend a couple of minutes on. But you mentioned that we were really intensive on policy work.
Mhm.
We are not a beer drinking club for the most part. While
Mhm.
that gets done, we're largely working in the weeds, and we're doing kind of I don't want to necessarily call it behind the scenes because most of it's involving
Yeah.
public engagement. But it usually is kind of it's the dirty work.
For better or worse, we are not a social or lifestyle branding company. We are like white paper policy. And we do our fair number of events where we bring our supporters and donors to come and enjoy, and libations occasionally, and
Sure.
listen about here's what we're doing and stuff like that. But you're right, we have our nose in policy and politics, and just issues that can a lot of your ability to hunt and fish, to have healthy habitat, clean water, access to public lands, all of those things can be on the chopping block or stand to be enhanced in that policy world. And that is exclusively almost where we work. We do get occasional grants to do some like habitat restoration, and there's probably room to expand that programmatic work, sure. But like right now we are white paper policy.
Yeah. And we do that, and this is kind of one of one of the features of IWF that I'm most proud of and that I think of as essential to our core function and really our reach, is that it's based around local solutions to local problems and working with a really entrenched group of
Mm-hmm.
affiliates and conservation ambassadors and a network of people. We are responsible for that research and engagement and front-facing advocacy, at those tables of
Mm-hmm.
whether it's forest planning or the state house or what have you. But it's all for representing the
Mm-hmm.
views of our kind of local contacts. Can you like you have been around for how many years of IWF?
Over
And
8, yeah.
over 8, and I'd love to hear kind of walk me through that affiliate program a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can talk
Mm-hmm.
about them personally on the day to day now, but like you've really grown that network, and those people are really born out of your passion to grow IWF. What does that affiliate network mean to
Yeah.
you, and kind of how does that function in terms of their role in this big
Mm-hmm.
picture conservation project?
So the definition of a federation is one from many, one voice, but we represent many different disparate organizations with different interests, whether it's wild sheep or bow hunting or turkeys or upland birds or rangeland habitat, whatever it is. Excuse me. And we take all of those, but we all have so much in common, and so we take that big coalition of groups together and we speak with a unified voice to influence policy to reflect our values. And of course those things are, we want good hunting and fishing and
Yeah.
access to public lands and all that kind of stuff. So we as a federation, then if there's an issue that pops up, we consult, of course, our board. We have goalposts that our board sets of like, here are the things we stand for. We want, and it's more of a foundation. It's like we uphold the North American model. If something's going to hurt hunting and fishing or something like that, we have to use science. We'll take action on it. If we have to use science to validate our arguments, not necessarily politics. And then we have our network of affiliates. So if there's an issue, say over in Eastern Idaho, we're going to contact our affiliates that mainly operate over there. But if it's a bow hunting issue, I'm going to contact the Idaho State Bow Hunters, the
Yeah,
Idaho
they're our first
traditional
call.
art bow hunters. Yeah. So or if it's a deer issue, we're going to contact the Idaho Deer Alliance and and the bow hunters again. So like we figure out, maybe if there's issue X, which of our affiliates might be impacted by this or have an opinion on it one way or another. We'll contact them. We get them involved in our decision-making process. And then, on top of that, and sometimes if there's an absence, if there's no affiliates that want to be involved, which is never the case, there's always affiliates where they're somehow tangentially connected. We'll work with local communities, grassroots, our supporters, our conservation ambassadors. We want to take the pulse of where people are at on issues. So all of our decision-making processes, 100%, are driven by Idahoans who hunt and fish and go after the resources. And there are some times when we have to go in and teach people about a complex issue, and it's tough. Salmon and steelhead, the Rapid River decision, and we can talk about those this podcast or later. But
Yeah.
the point is that sometimes we'll go in and say, hey, IWF supporters or hunters and anglers, and we'll do a grassroots event. We might only get 10% of the people in the audience who actually are supporters or know about IWF, but largely we want the opinions too of people who aren't just supporters of IWF. So, for instance, I'll choose the Rapid River decision. There was
Yeah.
briefly, some might chastise me for this, but we talk about this because sometimes like we have this conundrum where we want to talk about the good work we've done, but it often will highlight a place that people don't
Sure.
want people to know
Yeah.
about that has good fishing or hunting.
Yeah.
But let's just talk about it. And the Rapid River drainage is Payette National Forest, gorgeous scenery, rugged as shit, and it has almost all 9 of Idaho's game species, but I don't think you can hunt all of them like bighorn sheep. I don't think you can hunt right
I
there in
do
that
believe that
unit.
they're all there though.
They're all there though. Yeah, and there's lions, there's bears. I mean, it's the headwaters of the Rapid River, which is like the most pristine steelhead spawning habitat we have in the state, as well as bull trout, other listed species. Along a few decades ago, the motorized trails in that drainage were shut down because of some legal violation that the Forest Service had done, and that's another conversation. But it's a motorized group petitioned to open them all back up. So when those trails were shut down because of the lack of human pressure that came to that pretty big area, all of a sudden game species made this rebound. It's an over-the-counter tag, but there's really good quality bucks and bulls in that region. You know, anybody who's listening, yeah, anybody, anybody who's is hearing this, you know, you still have to put in the work. It is not easy, and you're gonna have to get in there. But
Anybody that's listening to the first podcast episode for IWF
all
already
12,
knows.
all 12,
All 6 people that listen to this, our parents already know.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, but there was a petition to open all these trails back up, and that would absolutely compromise the over-the-counter trophy quality, which is unique in the country. Those places and the opportunity to have over-the-counter tags, they're diminishing in this country. There's very few left. And so we were like, well, we knew the science, we knew on this that the increased pressure, the increased harvest would actually decrease the quality behind the opportunity
and the quality. Yeah.
So the closest community is, and this was also, this petition was supported by Adams County commissioners. However, the closest community is outside of Adams County. It's in Riggins, which is Idaho County.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to Riggins and we said, hey, outfitters and guides, general sportsmen, here's this petition. People from McCall, New Meadows, which is, you know, Valley County and Adams County too. You know, people close by, you utilize this landscape. What do you think of this? And by and large, they thought it was bullshit. They hated it. But we didn't want to take that stance. We knew the science, and we said, yeah, we know that this will hurt and the opportunity. So the science says, you know, this is increased human pressure. The result would be a lack of a reduction in opportunity. But where do the sporting public stand on this? And we went and talked to, you know, the Chamber of Commerce out of Riggins. There's a whole
over the course of like years, by the way.
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
This was not like last year or something.
Yeah, yeah. This stuff takes a long time.
Sure.
And sometimes that's for the best. I mean, it gives us time to really, it gives the public time to weigh in on these decisions that won't last for 30, 40 years. So, you know, we had to do a ton of organizing at the grassroots level, and we found just massive opposition to the closest communities, despite support from the elected county commissioners from Adams County and like this motorized group. So, you know, we got folks to submit letters. We got folks, you know, the president of the Chamber of Commerce to show up for the city of Riggins, and like businesses, and we just ginned up this like staunch groundswell of opposition, and the Forest Service sided with IWF and these local folks. And that record of decision was signed just this last year, making sure that those trails actually remain foot traffic only, horse traffic, llama traffic, whatever you want to say. But it's not motorized, motorized is not bad everywhere. But for this place, people, and even the people who commented, were motorized users, but they knew they'd rather do the motorized trails on the rim of this area and not go down into this big drainage and valley, because they knew that would really disturb that intact ecosystem. So that's a great example, microcosm of all the work that IWF does that goes into one decision that might have benefits, you know, generations to come. But it's a lot of work.
It's incredible how fragile and sensitive those big intimidating landscapes that support the like big wild game species and sort of charismatic, whether they're megafauna or fish, you know what I mean? When you see a spring Chinook in Marsh Creek that's yay wide, you know, it's remarkable the minute amount of change and how sensitive they are. And I think people are really kind of receiving that. And I think that's something that I take pride in, and you pointed it out, but really it's the way that we approach kind of whether it's our communications or our programmatic work. We're long-term thinking. We're really focused on long-term commitments to communities, to rural and riverside and connected landscapes, and working in a healthy way with folks that, while we may not be working for the same mission, we work with agriculturists and folks that have to relate to the same worlds. And I think that long-term thinking is something that really I would love to make sure and always stay committed to. Because it's not always the sexy stuff, and we tend to shy away from that clickbaity headline that sometimes is really easy. It's low-hanging fruit, but we're in it for the long haul. And
Forest Service NEPA processes aren't sexy, Daniel. How dare you?
I think so, but I have trouble writing it in a way that a lot of people are going to think so. Facebook doesn't think so, Brian.
Yeah, I know. Facebook. And we have a long history of doing that. And I mean, we were started in 1936.
Nailing it with the segues.
Yes. And we have a very long history of investment in Idaho communities to deliver conservation outcomes that have reverberated positively to today. And
Yeah.
like, you want to talk, should we list some of those off right now? I mean,
Which are responsible for why a
yeah.
lot of us are
Mhm.
here, and why those that are born here take pride
Yeah.
in the way that it is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
for sure. Let's
IWF.
rattle a few off.
Yeah, IWF has a super rich history of protecting, natural resources in this state that we are still benefiting from today. And I'm not taking credit for those. Obviously, a lot of those people. I mean, Ted Trueblood is this giant
My
in,
personal hero,
yeah,
writing hero,
conservation. I mean, like, helped start IWF and was a member. And there's a few books on this topic actually. And IWF is just peppered throughout them because we have our fingerprints on a lot of these things. Like, and for instance, IWF ran the campaign that passed Idaho's first citizens initiative, and that happened in 1938. We didn't have a sort of professional science driven fish and game agency at the time. The director was just the state game warden, and it was widely known, and he was widely criticized for like giving out prized elk tags to like political donors to the governor. It was just really gross political bullshit that we don't like to see with our game management, because it's not
Shout
good
out
for
to the
wildlife.
Poachers Club, one of
Yeah.
our affiliates.
Yeah.
We follow down. We'll include some
Yeah,
links
yeah.
somewhere on them for
I'll-
a pretty rich story about
Yeah,
that. But
yeah. I can nip that in the bud like briefly, but essentially, we went to the legislature and said, hey, there's this, this commission form of managing wildlife across the sweeping the country. We want that for Idaho, and they tried to introduce a bill. The legislature rebuked them, and these people, it's just a loose affiliation of folks. They formed the Wildlife Federation, and then, but they were kind of a drinking club at that point. And there was some notable Idaho, there was like a judge that like was really well known in Idaho, and so these are like prominent figures in Idaho history. And they told the legislature after the rebuke, in 2 years you'll have your answer. So in 2 years we ran a campaign educating folks about like, hey, here's what we could have if we had scientists. This burgeoning idea of ecology, which was new at the time, like managing for our opportunity instead of this political hack. And the state warden at the time, when he was quoted, I think, in the Lewiston Tribune when he was doing some tour up north, they're like, what do you think about these group of boys trying to organize this commission? He said, yeah, I think they're a bunch of poaching sons of bitches that are out for my job. And so they adopted this idea of the Poachers Club moniker, and they still greet each other today as sons of bitches. I'm an official poacher myself, actually. I've never poached an animal. Poachers don't poach. It's just it's like you call your friends
important to keep it in context here.
Yeah. So they're called the Poachers Club. It's an endearing term, but we largely formed to prevent poaching and other types of things. So we passed the Citizens Initiative in 1938. That established the commission, and it was supposed to keep wildlife management out of the hands of political jeopardy.
Supported by like 120,000 Idahoans.
It passed
at
with
the time,
76%,
which
and
is an insane.
I don't think there's been
76%. Is that
yeah,
what it was
yeah.
of the population at the time?
Yeah, of the voters that showed up.
Yeah.
I don't think there's been an initiative that's passed by that margin since. So, I mean, it was bad, and people cared. People were more connected to the outdoors then. I don't know if we'd get that kind of turnout today, frankly. But over the years, we've had a lot of other, that's the foundation. That's where we started, which is like, we helped delineate the boundaries of what is now the Frank Church Wilderness, then called the Idaho Primitive Area, and the Sawtooth National Recreation Area, which, culminated, and maybe we're not done, but we're culminated in the passage of a bill in 2015, which established the Boulder White Clouds Wilderness, which is within that recreation area. The picture that really convinced Congress to pass the law that created the National Recreation Area was of Ernie Day looking back at Castle Peak and Merriam Peak in the White Clouds. Ernie Day was the president of the Wildlife Federation. That photo was used in Congress to pass that bill. And then we worked on that bill in 2015, and it passed in 2015, establishing Boulder White Clouds Wilderness, now named the Cecil Andrus Boulder White Clouds Wilderness. What's the High Mountain Sheep Dam that kept the Middle Fork of the Salmon River undammed, largely led by IWF in opposition. World destination whitewater river that was going to be dammed by people who thought they were the smartest people in the room, and IWF showed up, organized at the grassroots level, and it was killed. We have there's our fingerprints are all over Idaho.
I think United Payette is a really cool example, and we haven't talked a ton about public lands until just like the last couple of minutes in here. Like, Can you dive into our participation in the origin of what is now called United
Yeah.
Payette and the state endowment lands? Because we've talked a lot about federal policy,
Hmm.
but I mean, state endowment lands are important, and they're contributing to our kind of local system here by
Hmm.
state constitutional mandate. And I think the area around McCall, you
Yeah.
and I both live in Boise, really, really important area, and I think it's sort of exemplary for something that's occurring around the state or
Hmm.
could. Can you talk about that? Just
Yeah.
like really high
Yeah.
level,
It's a
kind of
good
quick. 'Cause I, I
microcosm.
I think it's a
Yeah.
great example of
Hmm.
something that we could see a lot more of.
Yeah, so there's state lands that surround Payette Lakes. Most people know about McCall and the awesome opportunities that you have just for getting outdoors up there. It's beautiful. I used to live up there too, by the way. And so I'm a local.
That's why you're allowed to do it. I formed this because
I can actually
I'm a
talk about
local.
this. I'm a local. Any of you living in McCall, just disregard that statement. Okay, so anyways, all these state lands can be sold. The Constitution of Idaho mandates state lands to be maximized for long-term revenue. If they have a formula, if they sell a plot of land that has to be over a certain amount of market value, because then it goes into the stocks and bonds or endowment fund, which helps fund some important things, schools, emergency services, stuff like that. But primarily, the beneficiaries are schools, and but so if you come with enough money to back it up, you can buy state land. And the state has sold 41% of its lands since its founding. And so it's nothing new. But a lot of it is retained as timber harvest and for mining, and that
Hmm.
produces receipts. So a Trident LLC, a conglomerate, came and offered to buy those state lands, and that pushed us into action. Not only because I was a local, but because because those are super. 28,000 acres is huge. That it was like the majority of the shoreline around Little Lake Payette, which is an extraordinarily like cool resource that most people
Yeah.
don't even utilize, and some warm water fish in there, but it's access to water that would have been largely stripped away from people. A lot of the shoreline around the eastern portion and some of the northern portions of Big Lake Payette, and all of the land all to the east, all the way down even south to, of Little Lake Payette. It's a ton, and it's really awesome. There's great. As I said, I was local, so I can speak to this.
Yes, you said multiple
Yeah.
times. No one forgot.
Yeah, in case you forgot, I was local. I actually lived out kind of in the woods on the periphery, but I was surrounded by this landscape. I mean, there all of our, there's black bear, there's cougar, there's bobcat, there's fox, there's all these fur bearing species and carnivores. There's also deer and elk wandering around there. There's turkey, there's grouse. Like it's a sporting paradise, and most people don't think about it that way because it's so close to the city of McCall.
Well, and I have to say, sorry to
Hmm.
interrupt, but I have to say, like, while we're obviously that's the self-serving origin of the wildlife interest,
Hmm.
it's also the primary drinking water source for the
Hmm.
city of McCall.
It's the
Uh,
primary, yeah.
and
And
so
so
th-
you
there-
develop
there's
that
a
further, and
there's a everyone has a shared interest in
yeah.
these places'
Hmm.
well-being, and
Yeah.
I think that's just like kind of important to
So
interject. That
that's
while we
yeah.
have a focus,
Hmm.
all of these things all have a layer of shared interest.
That's how you build
within
coalitions.
Yeah,
That is how you build, because if we just said, "Hey, sportsmen don't support this,"
we're on our
if
own.
it's true, we're on our own. But that's the impetus. We said this is a bad idea. We don't want to see this privatized. So we teamed up with folks who represented, realtors, property owners, local business interests, outdoor rec folks, outfitters and guides. I mean, a lot of people who have a vested interest in preserving this landscape, and we formed a coalition called United Payette, and we started working together. And that's an organization that exists today, and it takes its own donations now. It's self-propagating, and we are working on a long-term solution to keep those lands in public hands. There's a lot of potential outlet, like ways we can do that, but we've had to consult lawyers. We have lobbied the governor's office. We meet regularly with state agencies, federal agencies, but we're bringing all these different interests to the table where we might just represent one. So it's like another federation, because that's a very successful model. And we fought Trident off. We helped the state come to a conclusion that they didn't have the funds and that they lowballed on the offer. And but they can't. These lands, while in state hands, are still in jeopardy, and they are high development value because it's resort quality landscape. And so the work is not done. But one of the ways we were able to sort of prevent other tridents from coming in and purchasing these lands if they had the money to back it up, is that we were able to get some of the parcels which were not making satisfying that long-term maximized revenue, the constitutional mandate, which really kind of highlights those. If you were a smart developer, you would look at those parcels where they weren't doing that and say, I will make it. So you will be making that constitutional maximizing profit. Here's $1 million. That's over the formula. They can't say no oftentimes. And so
we're going to want to cut that out of the podcast.
Yeah,
we don't want to give too many words of advice
yeah,
on how to circumvent. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So if there's any bastards listening to this, but for the good people listening, we looked at those parcels and we did a first of its kind idea where we're like, well, what if we just push those properties just over the money needed to sort of meet that constitutional mandate. And there's like a formula. It's around like you need to make 4% in revenue per year. It's just like an investment for them. And we designed these recreation conservation leases. I think the state politics prefer they're called recreation leases, where we stack that lease on top of the existing leases. So some of these lands have like grazing leases, timber leases, guiding leases. You stack one more lease, we call it the recreation lease, conservation lease, whatever. That pushes them over that revenue. So now they can actually tell tridents to say, actually, we don't need to sell these lands to you because they are meeting their financial minimums. So it provides them. So that's unique. We were told by many up high in Idaho's government that was a no-go. And a year later, Valley County is holding this lease with the state of Idaho on their lands funded by United Payette. And so it was a creative sort of way to prevent the development of these landscapes. And that's something that can be replicated in every other landscape in Idaho that has a high real estate development interest. So think like Island Park, Coeur d'Alene, all these places where developers are just salivating right now.
Yeah.
We can replicate this model and kind of stave them off. But like I said, that's a stopgap measure for now.
Sure.
And we can, but we have some more permanent solutions that are sort of, can't really talk about quite yet, but they're
teaser.
Teaser. Ooh. Yeah. Tune into the next episode.
UnitedPayette.com. Check that out. Really, big shout out to the team over there, and we work with them regularly, and happy to.
Incredible.
I'm a part of the team that works to do that sort of outreach and to take calls and emails and things. So if you have questions about anything we're talking about,
passionate, smart, hardworking people, and that's everybody. That not just us, but like the people we work with on United Payette are incredible.
That's what I am. Passionate, hardworking, smart, handsome. Anyway, just getting off the rails. Anything that we kind of didn't cover that you really wanted to hit, kind of about that outline of IWF before? I'd love to leave people with some leave behinds of where, how they can find us and what they can go. But like anything that we kind of really just like totally whiffed on.
I don't know. Maybe it's summarization. We want good and abundant populations of fish and wildlife. We want access to them, but there's often a spectrum to define those things. In some ways, we want a primitive experience that like capital W wilderness areas might provide. That might not be appropriate everywhere else. We want a big tent. There's people who want to drift rivers. There's people who want to motorboat rivers, and we try to find the balance. There's people who want to bow hunt over rifle hunt, whatever. We bring all those different interests. We try to find the balance. There's enough space in Idaho for all of us to kind of get what we want, and we want to make sure that we're talking to our affiliates, to grassroots folks, electeds, from top to bottom, to figure out what those things are. That is what we do. That's our bread and butter.
I think that's a great way to wrap it up. Be sure to reach out. As Brian mentioned, we're staff of 5, and there's real people there to take your calls and your messages. The state's only full-time staff exclusively committed to conservation of fish and wildlife, public lands, access, habitat. Here in the state of Idaho, you can find us at idahowildlife.org. There is a link to subscribe where you can get our general monthly newsletter. You can really sign up for as specific as you would like, whether it be campaigns, species-specific issues, or general topics like hunting, fishing, and public lands. All of our contacts are on there. Brian, thanks a lot for spending the time hanging out today, and we look forward to seeing you here again on a regular basis. We're going to try to put these out every couple of weeks. And if you have any ideas or cover areas that you would love to hear about on the Voice of the Wild podcast, definitely let us know. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Then I was supposed to be, but the walls froze through and shattered. I'm part partially peaceful.